At 2:47 p.m. on September 6th, a Ukrainian Mi-24 Hind attack helicopter executed a maneuver that defied all conventional air combat principles. The helicopter flew directly into the operational zone of a Russian air defense team in Oleshki, cruising at a low altitude of approximately 650 feet and a sluggish speed below 125 miles per hour, practically inviting destruction. Russian forces, positioned in an abandoned building 2 miles away, were stunned. A fully armed Mi-24, loaded with rockets, was brazenly exposed in broad daylight over a heavily defended airspace. This move contradicted every established doctrine or tactic, unless Ukraine deliberately aimed to provoke Russian fire. The action was part of a meticulously calculated baiting strategy designed to exploit vulnerabilities in the Russian air defense system's operational protocols. In the Oleshki region, military activity had been minimal for months, largely confined to drone warfare and sporadic artillery exchanges. Situated along the Dnipro River, the area features flat terrain with expansive fields and small villages, far from a strategic hotspot. Russian forces maintained static defensive positions, with scattered MANPADS teams and artillery units controlling the airspace to deter sudden raids. Yet a valuable Mi-24 attack helicopter, equipped with 4 VHV rocket pods, ventured into contested airspace at a perilously low altitude. On board, each pod carried 20 S-8Com rockets, totaling 80 unguided rockets. These 3.15-inch rockets, weighing 25.8 pounds each, with a 2.4-pound warhead, could penetrate 15.75 inches of rolled homogeneous armor, RHA. With an effective range of 1.24 miles, the S-8Com was ideal for area suppression, but unsuited for precision strikes. The sight of a helicopter carrying such a massive arsenal in this context was akin to a professional football player joining a kid's game, utterly incongruous. To the Russians, this seemed irrational, and that was the point. A Russian MANPADS team, stationed 2 miles away, tracked the helicopter through binoculars for 4 minutes. The 2-man team operated the 9K-38 Igla, one of Russia's most advanced portable air defense systems. Weighing 39.5 pounds when combat-ready, the 4.9-foot missile carried a 2.6-pound high-explosive fragmentation warhead with 0.86 pounds of explosives, capable of reducing the helicopter to wreckage. The 9M39 missile of the Igla reached speeds of Mach 1.9 with an effective range of 3.23 miles and a maximum engagement altitude of 2.17 miles. The real threat to the pilot, however, wasn't the explosives, but the guidance system. The 9M39 missile's nitrogen-cooled infrared seeker represented a significant advancement over earlier models, reducing signal interference and extending detection range to 3.1 miles under ideal conditions. The cooling system theoretically distinguished between aircraft engine exhaust and standard flares. The seeker used a simple algorithm to prioritize the strongest heat source, but could be deceived by multiple heat signatures in complex battlefield environments. This is where things got interesting. The Ukrainian pilot initiated a dive attack, unleashing all 80 rockets in a rapid, powerful salvo. The rockets streaked toward the ground at 2,000 feet per second, spreading across a 1,600-foot impact zone. Each rocket produced an explosion with a lethal radius of about 16.4 feet, igniting vegetation and creating visible smoke and dust plumes. Something was off about the attack. Many rockets landed harmlessly in the Dnipro River. Others hit empty fields, kicking up mud and debris. Only a few struck actual structures, including a small storage shed and some Russian observation posts, causing minimal damage. It appeared more like area suppression than a precise strike, a wasteful expenditure of ammunition in a quiet sector. However, the 1,640-foot spread served two purposes the Russians failed to recognize: broad suppression and, more critically, creating ideal conditions to force the enemy air defense to respond. Any MANPADS team witnessing such a reckless assault would feel compelled to engage what seemed an easy target. The Russian team adhered strictly to Soviet-era doctrine, which mandated immediate attack on any aircraft within the Igla's 3.23-mile range. The gunner conducted final weapon checks, confirming the target at 1.86 miles, within ideal firing range, with a favorable northeast angle. The low and slow Ukrainian helicopter, mid-attack, was squarely in their sights. The Russian gunner locked on to the target through the optical sight and activated the nitrogen-cooled infrared seeker. The Igla's 3.23-mile range couldn't reach across the Dnipro River from their position, but the Mi-24 had deliberately crossed into Russian-controlled airspace by about 0.62 miles, placing it within range. What the Russians didn't anticipate was why a Ukrainian helicopter would so blatantly expose itself in daylight over a heavily defended area. Oleshki, with scattered Russian units and no critical strategic targets, wasn't worth risking a valuable asset like the Mi-24. This tactical choice should have raised red flags, but the tempting target overrode their judgment. It would prove a fatal mistake. The trap was set, and at 2:48 p.m., as the final S-8 rocket detonated below, the Russian gunner fired. The Igla's infrared seeker locked on to the Mi-24's engine heat signature, and the solid fuel rocket ignited with a distinctive white flash visible from miles away. The missile accelerated to Mach 1.9, homing in on the target despite the afternoon sunlight. The Ukrainian pilot's SPO-15 Beriozo radar warning system immediately detected the launch, though his calm response suggested he had anticipated and prepared for this moment. The SPO-15 operated across a 0.6 to 17 GHz frequency range, detecting electromagnetic emissions from enemy radar and missile seekers. Using 4 antennas around the airframe, it provided 360-degree coverage, calculating threat direction with 15-degree accuracy. Its database, updated from battlefield experience, identified over 600 emission types, including the Igla's signature. The system prioritized threats on a 16 LED display, showing direction and severity, with distinct audio cues. A steady 800 Hz tone for radar lock, a pulsing 1600 Hz for missile launch, and a rapid continuous beep for terminal guidance. In this case, the high-pitched 1600 Hz pulse confirmed an infrared missile launch, exactly what the pilot expected. Banking sharply left at a 45-degree angle, the pilot activated electronic and mechanical countermeasures. The M-24 released a precise sequence of 12 infrared flares. The UV-26 countermeasure system, mounted on the airframe, held 192 PPI-26 infrared flares, burning at over 3,600 degrees Fahrenheit to create decoy heat signatures, diverting the incoming missile from the helicopter's engine exhaust. The pilot maintained steady speed and altitude for 3 seconds to ensure proper flare deployment, then executed a tight turn to escape the area. The timing was impeccable. The battlefield became a thermal nightmare. 80 rocket explosions below formed a wall of heat signatures, while the 12 flares bloomed like false suns above. The missile's seeker, designed for a single target, was suddenly overwhelmed by dozens of heat sources. It was like trying to spot a specific light bulb in Times Square at midnight. Impossible. Each S-8 rocket explosion created secondary heat signatures lasting seconds, igniting vegetation, fuel, and flammable materials across the 1,600-foot impact zone. Combined with the helicopter's flares, these ground-based heat signatures created a three-dimensional thermal maze that the 1980s-era seeker couldn't navigate. The Igla's seeker, advanced for its time, lacked multi-target processing in high-clutter environments. It lost lock on the helicopter and fixated on the brightest heat source, a cluster of burning rocket explosions 492 feet away. The missile streaked harmlessly past the Ukrainian helicopter, close enough for the crew to observe, but far enough to avoid the proximity fuse. Confirming the missile's failure, the pilot swiftly climbed to a safe altitude and withdrew west across the Dnipro River, evading further threats. This failure was always the intended outcome. The real victory came next. By firing, the Russian MANPADS team had sealed their fate. The launch's bright infrared signature was detectable by multiple sensors, pinpointing their location in the building. Ukrainian reconnaissance drones, operating at 6,562 feet, captured the launch and relayed real-time data to command. Ukrainian signals intelligence triangulated the launch site by combining the missile's thermal signature with electromagnetic emissions from the team's communications. AI-driven analysis processed this data in 90 seconds, pinpointing the target's coordinates with less than 33 feet of error. In past conflicts, such targeting took 15 to 30 minutes, but Ukraine's integrated sensors and streamlined protocols slashed this timeline. Within 90 seconds, the data was relayed to an appropriate strike unit, an FPV drone team 5 miles away. The three-person FPV drone team, consisting of 2 pilots and a technician, was pre-positioned 5 miles west of Oleshki. They operated a modified commercial quadcopter equipped with a 3.3-pound high-explosive warhead and a 1080p FPV camera for precise remote control. Instead of avoiding air defenses, Ukrainian pilots now deliberately exposed themselves to provoke enemy fire. This doctrine, refined from 2022 to 2023 battlefield experience, exploited Russia's reliance on static MANPADS teams and their slow post-engagement procedures. Rather than using terrain cover and long-range weapons to avoid air defenses, Ukrainian pilots used aircraft as bait, relying on countermeasures and accepting potential losses for a greater goal: dismantling the enemy's air defense network. The Mi-24, with armor resistant to 12.7mm machine gun fire and advanced countermeasures, was ideal for this baiting role. This calculated gamble, unthinkable in traditional military academies, proved remarkably effective. Meanwhile, the Russian team followed standard post-engagement protocols, unaware that an 8-minute countdown to their destruction had begun. Soviet doctrine mandated immediate relocation after firing to avoid counterstrikes. However, Oleshki's muddy terrain from summer rains and the dilapidated building slowed this process. In the Cold War era, shoot-and-scout tactics offered reasonable safety due to adversaries' slow response times. Modern surveillance and networked operations reduced this window to minutes. At 2:49 p.m., the FPV drone team received final target coordinates. The operator launched the quadcopter flying at 164 feet and 50 miles per hour to optimize approach time and minimize detection. The Russian MANPADS team focused on packing up, neglecting perimeter security. The 9K-38 Igla required multiple steps to stow: disassembling the launch tube, safely handling the cooling battery, and removing the thermal battery powering the seeker. In muddy conditions and cramped quarters, this took 6 minutes, creating a vulnerable window. The summer rains turned the ground into thick mud, clinging to boots and gear. The building, once a hideout, became a trap as the team navigated rubble and damaged stairs while carrying nearly 40 pounds of equipment. At 2:54 p.m., 6 minutes after the failed missile launch, the Ukrainian drone approached the target. Through the live first-person feed, the operator observed 2 Russian soldiers still at the firing position, struggling with their gear. The Igla's 23.8-pound launch tube and 15.6-pound grip made movement cumbersome in the mud. The drone's approach maximized success while minimizing detection, flying at 164 feet and using tree cover to mask its trajectory. Its electric motor produced minimal heat, and its high-pitched whine was audible only within 330 to 600 feet. By the time the Russians noticed the drone's sound, mere seconds remained. The Russians remained focused on their task, oblivious to their dwindling seconds. Through the FPV camera, the operator made final adjustments for optimal positioning. The drone accelerated to 62 miles per hour in the last 5 seconds, diving directly between the 2 soldiers and their equipment. At exactly 2:56 p.m., 8 minutes after the Igla launch, the drone struck. The 3.3-pound warhead detonated on impact, producing a blast with a 33-foot lethal radius, completely destroying the MANPADS team and their equipment. Within hours, Russian communications traffic revealed widespread discussions among air defense units. MANPADS teams across the region received new orders: engage only with explicit authorization, accompanied by warnings about FPV drone threats. This hesitation, driven by fear of immediate retaliation, degraded the effectiveness of Russia's entire air defense network. Ukrainian helicopters, particularly the Mi-24, with its 5,500-pound payload capacity and 208 miles per hour top speed, could now operate more freely, especially in low-density air defense zones like Oleshki. The baiting tactic not only eliminated a MANPADS team, but also created a psychological effect, forcing Russian gunners to weigh survival against duty. In the 48 hours following the incident, Ukrainian intelligence noted a 30% reduction in MANPADS launches in the surrounding area, highlighting the tactic's immediate impact. This calculated risk transformed the Mi-24 from a potential victim into an active hunter, neutralizing Igla systems with devastating efficiency.